Okay, this is factors continued, and it's also on some more on examiner issues. So, first of all, we want to look at again at the validity of tests and validity of use. So, tests may be used inappropriately, even though they're valid. This can often apply to using a very valid test. It tests what it's supposed to test. It's even reliable when it's used on the correct group. However, we do have some tests that are not normed, or the normative data is only occurs on one particular group. One test comes to mind, and this particular test is an autism test, and it's not one that's highly used, and this is the reason why. Because it has the normative data is done on 345 children, very, very small population. They are all white, and they're all from the Midwest. Now, but this test is sold and marketed to be an autism test worthy of the entire country. Well, having lived in different parts of the country, the Midwest is nothing like the Southwest. I know when I moved here, we had a lot of culture shock, just because things were so different. There are attitudes that are somewhat different. They may on the surface look like they're the same, but then when you start getting to know how people actually think about things, you can really see some major philosophical differences just between those two parts of the country. And then you think about, well, how is New York City different than Kansas City? The differences are huge. How would a person of Hispanic or say Navajo heritage see autism? Well, many times they don't see it as being crucial. As long as they're able to function and you can teach them functionality, then many times they don't see them as having a disability. A disability to many native tribes, especially Navajo, Hopi, Apache, up in that area, they see disability as physical. It needs to be a physical abnormality in order for them to see it as a disability. And so, and unless it's something where they can't hear, or they have blindness, these are all considered to be physical abnormalities. But just having difficulty learning, many times they don't see that as a disability. So you really have to kind of look at how tests can be biased. Even though it might be valid, it might not be used correctly. So they can be biased and discriminate against different groups. Then you also have item bias. When an item is answered incorrectly by a disproportionate number of times by one group as compared to another. So say you have, one of my favorite questions is on the WISC, the Wechsler's Intelligence Scale for Children. Had to remember what the acronym stood for. And one of the questions on it is, or on some of the versions, is, what do you get from a cow? Well, you can get a lot of things from a cow. But what are children most likely going to say that you're going to get from a cow? Now, there's actually a correct and incorrect answer to this. If a child says, well, you get meat, unfortunately, that's an incorrect answer. But children in the Southwest are most likely going to have a variety of things because they live on ranches, many of them. they're more familiar with ranch life, and so they have a wider understanding of what you're going to get from a cow. The correct answer is milk, because that is what the whole of the country understands. However, is it incorrect? Their answer wasn't really wrong. It's an incorrect response. And so when you have this disproportionate understanding, sometimes you have item bias. Now, then you have to look at the predictive validity, and that how it's predicting for one group and not another. So if that predictive validity is not taking into account differences between region, then you're going to have a major issue with validity with that test. Now, other sources of variability of scoring. You have a general ability to understand the instructions. So sometimes with some children, you're going to have to really explain and make those instructions very concrete. The conditions of the testing. Is the room too cold? Is it too hot? I had to take a test once in a very just extraordinarily hot room. It's very difficult to think under those conditions. What if the light is too bright or not bright enough? So you need to look at all of those tests. What if you're in a hallway? Now, that's pretty noisy out there. Hallways are not good places to test. Then you want to look at stable response sets. How many of you believe that answering C on a multiple choice test is going to bring you a higher grade? Here is a hint. On my quizzes and tests, I check for item variability, so I try and have just as many A answers as B answers as C answers. So I try to keep that issue away, because I don't want you choosing C just because you're a little unsure of the answer. I want you to really think through those questions. And so this is one way that I try and make my own testing more valid. Then look at the unreliability or bias in grading or rating performance. Especially when you're rating performance, this is very, very subjective, so you have to be careful and have a rubric for that. Look at motivation for the test. This goes right back to what we were talking about in, I believe it was Chapter 2, possibly Chapter 3, but I think it was Chapter 2, on motivation, building rapport with the student. You must build rapport first and foremost. Otherwise, that motivation is really could be very low, especially with kids who really need to have that motivational uplift to help them get through it. Emotional strain again, thinking about, has something happened? Before you test somebody, find out how their day was. Find out if anything happened the night before. You might want to talk to mom or dad just to make sure that everything is cool and the kid is in sync. And just to, so it's very important for us to make sure that the student is doing their absolute best so that they can give their absolute best to the testing that you need for them to do. All right, now measurement error is reduced by writing the items clearly. Now, I think both classes, both of you have had an instance where when the test questions transferred over on course, sometimes they don't transfer over correctly, and if I miss that, when I go back and check them for the final check before I produce the quiz, then you get a test question that just makes no sense whatsoever. Thus, most everyone will miss that question. So what do? I throw that question out. But you need to make very, very sure that you write those items clearly. Make the instructions easily understood, and always adhere to test administration. If there is a reason to leave test administration, be sure that you write it down and report that. And be consistent with your scoring. So any fluctuation in test scores can result from factors that are related to a measurement process, and they're irrelevant to what's actually being measured. Then we have a difference between the observed score, the true score, and that's going to be called your error. And then we need to be able to develop better tests that are less random. So we want to take as much of the random effect out of our testing as possible, so that what we're actually looking at is the amount of error possible